In the multifamily business, if you're using debt to buy assets, you will likely be forced to do a phase one environmental test to make sure there's no gas tanks, mold, and other hazardous conditions on a certain property. I thought it would be awesome to do the top 5 uh-ohs that these environmental consultants have seen while doing their work. And I wanted to bring on Kurt Howell of Longleaf Environmental Consulting, who I've known for a very long time. Take a listen to this. Let's go! All right, so we have as a guest Kurt Howell, who's the principal of Longleaf Environmental Consulting. I've known Kurt for probably 20-something years when I used to work for another gentleman doing development projects in the commercial and multifamily business. And Kurt's always been someone I could trust, someone who gives it to me straight on the environmental. So Kurt, welcome. And what's your number one, brother?
I'd say the number one is have the trust in the consultant that you are involved with. They've got to have good experience and be able to tell you quickly the risk relating to the property you're evaluating. So that's probably the first thing.
And that makes sense because, one of the things I think you and I talked about prior was, does that include sometimes the bigger company is not the better company? Is that one of the things you had said?
Sure. I've worked for large firms, and a lot of times you might deal with the principal or the owner or upper level person, and then a 25-year-old who's right out of school is who's looking at the property for you. And that's who you're trusting to be your eyes, in the field, basically.
Good one. All right. Number 2, what you got?
I think emotion and motivation in the property is something to definitely consider. I've never been approached by someone who says, tell me why I shouldn't buy this property. It's more of fix it so that I can make this happen.
So you'll have folks who are trying to, probably through FOMO, right, fear of missing out on the deal, almost want you to help them come up with reasons why you should buy it, particularly when there's problems, when it sounds like the question more should be like, tell me why I shouldn't buy this.
Sure. And I think my advice would be start as early as possible, because consultants, but also government agencies, people we need as subcontractors like drillers, there's a backlog of all those services. And I know a lot of times sellers will say, I've got 3 offers. You all need to make your mind up as fast as possible. Let's go. But you've really got to weigh your risk, because once you buy it, you bought the farm, so to speak.
That's right. What's your number 3?
I would say relating to government entities and even with sellers is get things in writing, because so many times when it turns into a legal situation, if you don't have it in writing, you don't really have anything.
You and I talked about this earlier, and you helped a partner of mine and I when we were buying a gas station, whatever that was, 10, 12 years ago. And we sat down with the government organization who handles the environmental for that city. And they told us about one of the leaks that was covered under the program from a gas tank, but then didn't tell us about the other one they knew about. And as you know, we got into a crap storm, so to speak, that lasted 10 years, and you helped us out tremendously on it. So get it in writing is really good advice, whether it be from government organizations or the seller or whoever the case may be. Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, and people come and go, and they may not have the same incentive or be as diligent as what you're looking for. And you've just got to be careful about that.
That's right. What's your number 4?
Say be careful of a consultant that a seller is trying to write some letter that basically everything's okay here without doing your own due diligence. There'll be times where people will get a phase 1 or even like a summary letter on a site in hopes of smoothing things out or making the deal go through. And a lot of times people think, oh, well, this is great. They gave me this. It's all perfect. And it may not be.
So you're saying like sometimes you may be approached by a seller who has hired you to give a little more of a, yeah, this is no big deal, this is okay, on something that may not be the case. Or maybe there's gas stations nearby, maybe there's laundromats nearby, and those are things that should be looked into further for the subject property, but they're trying to corral you and push you and give you, and so that you'll give some sort of a, it's okay, if you will.
Sure. And you can find all different, just like most professions, you can find all different kinds of consultants. There's some people have no problem doing that. The first thing I ask in that scenario is how recent is what we have? And if it's 5 or 20 years old, I'm like, you need to get updated information first of anything. And then it goes back to who are you working with? Are you trusting someone else's consultant versus do you have someone you deal with? It's just like an attorney or a real estate advisor. Are you going to trust what someone else tells you, or do you have a relationship with someone that you feel comfortable with?
Isn't that amazing? Relationships are still a key, whether it be in a regulated business or not, right? I mean, it's a big time. Same thing in brokerage, same thing in appraisal, investors, attorneys, all of it.
Sure. There's always someone who will do it cheaper, or, just for whatever reason, the timing aligns and they're like, that's who we're going to go with. And I say, okay, well, what's their background or who are they?
Yeah.
So those are important things to think about.
All right. What's your fifth and final that you come across in your business?
The number 5 would be making certain that the report is certified to you and that there's not a statement where the liability is limited, the consultant's liability. Very often I'm given a report that was produced 10 years ago that was written for someone I don't even know who they are. And a bank or a investor says, well, I've got this. It looks all good. What do you think? And I say, well, first off, it wasn't done for you, so it really doesn't count. The ASTM standard is that you try to have something that's as current as possible, but definitely I would say about a year old is what's decent for a phase 1. You can have a discharge on a gas station today. We wouldn't know about it unless we did a report at the current time.
Gotcha.
So let alone if something's 10 years old, a lot can happen in that time frame.
So let me make sure I understand. If a seller is going to sell, let's say, an apartment complex, and they have a phase 1 that they inherited when they bought it, and that phase 1 was written for the previous owner, and it says it's clean, it doesn't really mean jack to the new buyer. It's not like the new buyer has comfort in buying the property and having that phase 1, number 1, because it's an older phase 1. Number 2, if something came up during their ownership, because the buyer didn't hire the phase 1 person and the phase 1 person did that report for them, for their name, they're not really covered for liability purposes. Is that right?
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Sure.
Right.
They could call the consultant and say, hey, you messed up. And they'd say, who are you?
That's a big deal. I mean, people think when you buy a property and you got a clean phase 1, even if phase 1 was done a year ago, if it wasn't assigned to you as the buyer and something comes up, you're saying that consultant doesn't have liability for those findings. Is that right?
Sure. Or if they limit it to, let's say, the cost of a phase 1, which might be $1,800, if there's $300,000 worth of contamination, that's not going to go very far towards that bill.
So you're saying there are some consultants who will then, in the fine print, they will provide a liability policy, but sometimes it's only the cost of the report, or it could say no more than 20 grand or whatever the case may be.
Sure, exactly. Most banks we work with, you have to have $1 million per occurrence, 3 million aggregate. The SBA is the same way. But I can tell you in the over 20 years I've been doing it, very rarely does a private client ask me for a certificate of insurance unless someone has asked them for it.
So even if the consultant has the proper liabilities on their policy, what they write in the phase 1 language for the person who hires them overrides. So if you have $1 million per occurrence insurance policy, but they wrote in the contract that the person who hired him has, and they say, my liability is limited to $10,000, that trumps what their per occurrence insurance policy is.
Sure, that if that's what the contract they signed says.
Right. That's a big deal, brother.
But I can tell you for certain, the SBA and banks right now will say we need that from you, and you need to be current, of course, too. It can't be 6 months old. And the SBA, every single time you submit a report to them, they'll say we need this and we need it certified to us and to the bank, and to usually there's another in between for the SBA that handles the financing. And that stuff's really critical. I think, people say to me, well, what happens if the consultant messes up? I say, well, good question. What do you think? Someone should be responsible. That's what this is all about. And, I always try to look at these to be direct with the client, not be vague, not leave anything where it's a gray area, because I'd be upset myself if I've spent the money and then found out, oh, these guys nonchalantly didn't tell me something that I really should have been concerned about.
Well, Kurt, I can't thank you enough for coming on to the show. I know you've got over 25 years experience in this business, and you were the first person I thought of when I came up with this topic. And I'm going to put down in the description for those of you who want to hire Kurt for any future projects, you'll find his contact information in the description of the video. Please reach out to him, and thanks for taking a watch.